Okay, good evening everybody. It's lovely to see so many people here today, and I know a number of people are joining us online, and you're equally welcome. My name is Jenny Hyam. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of St George's, and I'm going to kick us off with a few words of introduction, but the person that you're really here to see will be with us shortly. It's really wonderful to be able to have this in-person event for Caroline. She, in fact, was promoted during COVID times, and surprise, surprise, events such as this were in abeyance then. But we've not forgotten, and here we are today to hear all sorts of things. But one of the things that really intrigued me about this lecture was, in fact, including the word failure, because that's very modest and honest of you, because sometimes from externally people never even associate the word failure with somebody who becomes a professor. So I personally am going to be very interested to hear what you have to say, Caroline. The other thing is that when you learn a little bit more about your colleagues, is that we've had a number of overlapping experiences, in that Caroline and I both trained to do medicine at University College London. Not at the same time, I'm considerably more wrinkled. And she took her BSc in anatomy and developmental biology, which probably helped her a great deal in her subsequent career. You need to know the anatomy. So currently, as you can see, and many of you obviously know, she's a consultant orthopaedic lead here at George's, and also lead for outpatients. And from the point of view of the university, I'm very grateful for all her input with students, including projects and special study. And very importantly, I'm sure is, and I've seen her once in action, actually online, about talking about women in medicine, women in surgical careers, and that is extremely important to have such positive role models. So what's going to happen is we're going to hear her lecture, which is actually fairly succinct, and there will be an opportunity, unusually for inaugural lectures, because normally I forbid them, so you have to ask a question over a drink. In this particular instance, if we have a little time, we'll allow 1 or 2 questions here in the room, and we will repeat them so that the people online aren't disenfranchised and can't hear what the heck's been said. But very importantly thereafter, I really would very much welcome you all coming to join us for a drink on the 2nd floor, so we can circulate and get to know each other and follow up. And finally, thank you very much to Toby, who has come to give the vote of thanks. He will explain the relationship and how he has had a professional overlap with Caroline. Thank you. We really do appreciate your attendance as well. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Ladies and gentlemen, an inaugural lecture is advertised as an occasion of great significance in an academic's career. It is a chance to share achievements, entertain, and stimulate. Above all, it is representative of your field of expertise. And so, this lecture is all about failure and how failures have helped shape me as a professor. Winston Churchill said that success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And he's also quoted as saying that attitude is the little thing that makes a big difference. To improve is to change, and to be perfect is to change often. It's not enough that we do our best. Sometimes we have to do what's required. And courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, but courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So the ideal career path when I started out, I thought would be an easy path to follow. I'd have good company, it would be in extremely nice surroundings, and I would have a map and directions as to which way to go. The reality is somewhat different, and there are times in your career when you can feel lost or very lost indeed. And you often feel terrified. So you can feel that everyone is better, faster, or more in control than you are in any given situation. You can feel out of your depth and wonder which way is up and where everybody else is going. And often you'll try to fit into a crowd and not know how to do that. But maybe you should celebrate standing out and rejoice. And this is a free diving group where I'm the only woman and also the one with the most hair. So, should you heed the signs? Or should you carry on regardless with good protection? And this is a group who went trad climbing with me, and my 2 male companions decided that tweed flat caps were a good headwear protection. So realise you're not alone, and that taking a photo 10 metres underwater where you need to smile is probably a not very good idea either. Don't give up, warm up, and then get back out there and carry on. Because it isn't a race, and you need to sometimes take your time. Take sufficient breaks and bring snacks. And this, I have to say, is the grumpiest tortoise I've ever met. Seek inspiration, and your mentors can be older or younger than you. You can learn in both directions, and they can make a huge difference to your experience and insight as to what it is to be a surgeon or to have a career. Motivate others, as there's certainly safety in numbers, and bring people up behind you. And remember the lessons that you have learnt. So if I could look back now to 1993, to my old class at UCL, of which Nahid in the audience was a member, what would I say to myself? I'd say that good training is everything and makes a difference as to how you continue with your experience in your career. And that you need inspirational friends who buoy you up and keep you going. And it's interesting that you can always find someone who's willing to go to North Norway at -30 degrees and climb a frozen waterfall with you. So back in 1997, I failed my primary. And the 3 friends who I studied with, we all decided to go and sit it again in Dublin. Rather despondently, we turned up, convinced that we would fail, and we failed again. And sometimes failure really is a state of mind, because we all passed 6 months later with no more knowledge than before, but just a determination to succeed above all else. And we were rewarded with a letter from Sir Rodney Sweetnam and a glass of slightly warm, sweet sherry at the college. From there, I went on to Norwich, Essex, London, and then finally Melbourne. And along the way, I met many very inspirational bosses who supported me and let me fail at things, and colleagues who are now consultants. And I have the dubious honour of being the last surgeon to overrun an orthopaedic operating list at the Old Norfolk and Norwich, and we graffitied on the wall to mark the occasion. I've now been told that overrunning a list is counted as 106% theatre productivity, so maybe that's now a success. Our first major study in the department as a group was back in 2013, when we looked at open fractures and how a bone poking through the skin might affect the blood supply and cause damage. It was a long process to set up this study, and we needed a lot of research support from the teams around the hospital. We found the follow-up difficult, as young patients tend to want to disappear and not come to follow-up. And we collaborated with a big group across the emergency departments, radiology, and trauma and orthopaedics. Finally, in 2019, we published our results and gave ourselves a big pat on the back that we'd managed to achieve our success after lots of stops and starts. So we learnt the research takes a long time, but it can also make a difference. And now we know that 30% of patients with open fractures can have an injury to their vessels, and CT angiograms form part of standard treatment here at St George's. In 2015, we started our next study, which was to look at broken bones where the break is at several places in the bone. And we wanted to compare how a rod down the middle of the bone and a scaffolding around the outside of the bone compared for patients and what was better. We worked really hard to build up our study and write the protocols, and it took about 2 years before we could start the study. We had 3 months to complete, and it took a long time to bring other hospitals on board and help us recruit our patients. And we finally recruited 3 patients, but were unfortunately closed by the funders. We went through a period of mourning, and we felt anger, denial, and finally acceptance that our study sadly would not run. But it still goes to show that this study produced 3 papers. So out of all of the studies that I've ever done, it's produced the most papers to patients recruited that I've ever seen. And I learned a lot from the trial managers, Kushla and Molly, as to how to manage trials and the ins and outs of all the paperwork involved. So in 2019, feeling slightly despondent with my career, my friend John, an accountant, and I wondered whether there was something else out there for us both. We thought of exploring other career options and decided that we would try and join the circus, with lessons in the trapeze soon to follow. We found a course where the delegates were 8 and 10 years old and confidently felt that we would more than hold our own with our skills on the ropes. I'd like to at this stage warn the audience that some of the scenes may be of disturbing nature and also contain some strong language. As you can see, I'm not a natural trapeze artist. So what did I learn? Well, I learned that a fear of heights and extreme motion sickness are not conducive to a long and prosperous career on the trapeze, so I returned to medicine. My friend John followed me on the trapeze, executed a perfect hands-off, a backwards flip, landed safely in the safety net, and then promptly went up and threw up in the bushes. So both of us returned to our careers, confident that we'd explored other options and that we'd made the right choice career-wise to continue. And so on to my path of becoming a professor. So the next study was with Toby, a very good friend, and this was a group intervention physiotherapy treatment for patients after they'd had a hip or knee replacement. And the aim was to see whether putting a group of patients in a room together for physiotherapy worked better than single physiotherapy. We congratulated ourselves on starting the study after a couple of years of preparation, winning grants, and we'd recruited over 1,000 patients to the study when COVID suddenly hit. And with COVID came social distancing of 2 metres, and suddenly putting a group of elderly patients in a room together for physiotherapy seemed like a rather unsafe idea. We made the difficult decision to close the study, and again, you can't really predict when a global pandemic may affect your research. But with a global pandemic comes the chance of future research projects. And within that COVID first wave, we rapidly had to reorganise outpatients and try and work out how we fit several different clinics into the same outpatient area, all with different times and needs and social distancing. This we thought was a complex mathematical problem, which would do well with artificial intelligence as a solution. And we found a great group at Kingston of computer scientists, much more intelligent than we were, who could solve the problem. We submitted our grant and congratulated ourselves on a well-written application, filling a need within the department. A few weeks later, it was rejected, with assessor number 4 saying that he didn't think this was a significant issue in the COVID pandemic, and even in the first wave, the hospital space was not overrun. In the second wave, we very nearly were overrun, and even now in the NHS, we struggle with space. So sometimes success is about timing rather than what the quality of your idea is like. So why is failure good for success? Well, we forget, but toddlers fall 15 to 20 times an hour when they learn to walk, and 8 to 10-year-olds aren't afraid of failure when they're learning the trapeze. So failure teaches you what works and what does not, and it teaches you resilience and the ability to cope with changing situations. We forget, but an awful lot of successful people fail and fail repeatedly before they get to their goals. So we should celebrate failure and make it more acceptable to those that come behind us. What is the spectrum of failure? It includes so many different aspects, such as deviance, inattention, process inadequacy within the job, the challenge of the actual task itself, complexity and how a problem can rapidly change, such as during COVID, uncertainty, and the testing of hypotheses, as well as exploratory testing. So if you are going to enter a triathlon, choose the Olympic rather than the shorter distance. If you're unable to run, go with someone who can't swim, and I'm sure you'll all succeed. We continuously learn from small failures. Take, for example, caving, where you're always supposed to let someone know where you're going. You need to be able to prosic up a rope. You need to wear appropriate clothing and definitely good footwear. And above all, you should go with a group of experienced cavers. So what did we do? Well, on a Monday, we decided it might be a good idea to go caving. And by Friday, we'd put together our ramshackle group to go with various bits of kit and hired the helmets. My friend John debated long and hard as to what snacks we should take with us, whether we should take crisps, which were light but could crush, or Mars bars, which were more sustainable and better to squeeze through corners. We looked at how to prosic and we all Googled it and felt fairly confident that we could make our way up a rope if required, but we hoped that it wouldn't be. About 2 hours into our trip underground at the Giant's Hole, we realised that we hadn't told anyone where we were going. However, we were fairly confident that having hired the helmets and the headlights, if we didn't return them within the 2 days specified, someone would twig that we'd gone missing. We then got to a static rope about 3 hours into the expedition, and this was the only way out of the cave. And with much kerfuffling, tried to work out how to prosic up a rope. Slightly unprepared, John disappeared up the rope, disappointed that the rest of the group hadn't followed the instructions. And finally, we managed to haul ourselves out, back to the pub, and to reflect on our expedition and the failures and successes involved. So it's always important to reflect on your failures. And in climbing, this is known as working the route, often done at a sunny spot, just after lunch, and it can often take 1 or 2 hours before you reach a conclusion as to how to succeed. So be prepared. You can indeed go for a night out, ice climbing, and then dinner at the Savoy, and I can reassure you that the cloakroom attendants are more than happy to look after Madam's ice axes for her. Test the boundaries. So unless you test the boundaries, you'll never know what's on the other side and what your reward might be. Be the bohemian, the maverick. Find new ways of solving your problems. Enjoy the journey of failure, because it is a good journey. Don't worry too much about your destination. You will get there in the end. And build a good team. So if you're going to have a team to do the Tough Mudder, you need some strong members, some good runners. You never leave anyone behind, and you should, above all, beware of electric cables. Learning never stops, and conferences are a good place to network and find out what the latest advances are in your chosen field. It's a way of connecting with people across the specialties and finding new solutions to your problems. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There is always someone who knows more than you do about a chosen route or task and can give you pointers along the way. So try new things. And this is a cockroach tour of the Natural History Museum that a friend who was a nurse at the Norfolk and Norwich outpatients decided that we would do. And we learned a lot about cockroaches. Don't be afraid to fail. So on this multi-pitch route in La Pedriza, it was windy and slippery, and there were 2 teams climbing. We were all thinking it, but it took until one of us said that we should bail, that we came off the climb. And here I learnt the philosophy of bailing. When it's unsafe to go on, you're better off to bail off the climb and live to climb another day. How did this prepare us for the COVID crisis? Well, we entered a situation which none of us could have predicted. It changed rapidly. We were all stressed at work and at home, and we needed to adapt and move forward. So any decision was better than no decision, and we soon found out what worked and what did not, and that was resilience through previous failures. We took time out and we had a strong team, which we have still today. Make your mark. It might take you a while, but you will make your mark in your chosen career choice. Don't forget that the world is slowly changing, and 2022 is a very different place to 2018, and we need to change with it. Diversity is the key to a safe team. You want to be surrounded with people who will challenge you, where you can fail in a safe environment and test what works. Above all, there is safety and support in diversity. We mustn't forget the power of tea, snacks and family to pick us up, dust us off, and let us continue on our way from failure to success. A good bit of luck is all that's needed sometimes, and that helps you on your career as well. And so, in summary, I would like to say that failure is normal and it's part of success, and that's how I have become a professor. And that's how I hope many of the medical students listening into this talk will one day too join the ranks. Thank you.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm going to suggest that you perhaps take your own questions, if there are some questions from the audience, because you may know lots of people here. And before people, I'd just be very interested, you mentioned failures in certain research papers and your fellowship. Were there any elements in terms of your career and times perhaps you felt you failed? I often find if things go wrong with patients, and I feel when something's gone wrong, it's my fault. I'm just interested in your reflections on that part of the job as well.
I think that's very true, and especially at the moment when we're so challenged with resources that often you do feel that you're failing your patients. And that's why it's always good to have a very strong department or a team where you can discuss and almost debrief. And I had a very interesting conversation with an army colleague on Friday who said that that's what they do in the army, that you come back from deployment and you discuss what went well and what went badly, and you debrief. And that's definitely what you need in a high-powered job, both clinically and also in terms of research, because they're tiny steps, tiny failures, but it is hypothesis testing sometimes to achieve a better result at the end of the day.
Brilliant, thank you. So, anybody feel inspired to ask a question? Yeah, Jonathan.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting. One of the things that comes out from your presentation is your challenging yourself with risks and things like that, and trying to push boundaries for yourself. Does this come across into your clinical and your research work at all? And how do you manage risk when it's someone else's life, not just your own that's on the line?
I think
I'll just pause it just in case people didn't hear it online, but it's a very interesting question about the bleed through between risk and challenge in clinical life and how it influences one to the other.
I think that's a really good question, and often you have to do almost a mini risk analysis to look at what the benefits are as opposed to what risks that you might take. And sometimes there isn't a good solution. So you might have a patient who, if you do nothing, they'll die, but if you operate on them, they could die on the table. And then it's trying to decide what's best for that patient. Can they make a choice for you, or do you need to make that decision for them? And there isn't a good answer, but sometimes making a decision is better than making no decision at all. And I often feel that with trauma patients when they come in and they're multiply injured, and it's a very high octane situation in the emergency department, and you're being bombarded with lots of information, and sometimes you can't wait for all of the information to get back. You have to make a decision. You're going to go to the scanner, you're going to go to the operating theatre, because if you just sit there and wait, the patient will die through inaction.
I'm going to apologise. This is really fascinating, so I've got loads of questions for you, so probably over a day or 2 minutes later. Thank you very much for the talk. So I guess there's kind of two things. The first thing I think there's something to be said about when you talk about failing patients, that sometimes it appears that we kind of take that weight on our own shoulders, and you've got people around you to kind of share the weight, but that's a discussion for another day. The thing that I thought was really interesting when the group feels that if you were to say go back to your medical education, do you think there's a part where you could actually have a system in place where we actually train people as teams, but also have an element of kind of training to expect failure? Because we're always very keen, so you've got to pass your speed, you've got to pass your exam, but what about the failure aspect to it and how we kind of almost condition people to accept that as part of their practice? I don't know what your views are in the audience as well, whether there's actually a system in place and how we actually train people to work as a group.
Again, that's a great question, and that's definitely what pilots and astronauts do, so that when they're in a situation in an austere environment, they're prepared for whatever is thrown at them. They've had the training to deal with failures and rapidly make decisions. And maybe that is something that's missing from education currently. We've started to use more simulation and virtual reality as part of education, and I would hope that we increase that so that rather than being thrown into a situation where you're comfortable, you're actually then able to be thrown into a situation where you're uncomfortable and you're able to start making decisions.
Okay, well, I brilliantly handled questions. Thank you so much. If it's okay with you, I'm going to invite Toby down to give us the vote of thanks. Thank you.
I didn't want to mess this up, so I've actually taken some notes, which I never do. You can tell the importance of this. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. So I'm Toby Smith, I'm Professor of Clinical Trials, University of Warwick. So I asked, what's the remit of this? And I was told, you need to say a few things about how you know Caroline, a few things about how wonderful she is, and then you've got some really important announcements at the end. So I'm going to go through that order. I had the pleasure yesterday to go through really my records to work out when I first met Caroline and how I know Caroline and what we've done. So I actually remember it vividly. Caroline and I shared our PhD and our doctoral supervisor together. So Professor Simon Donnell supervised both of us at different time points. And I remember at the end of a PhD meeting, I was asking Simon about a project around tourniquet use in orthopedic surgery. And Simon said, there's one person you must get in touch with. And he said, I supervised Caroline Hing. She did her MD on mathematical modelling for trochlear dysplasia and the distal femur. He said, I understood most of it. It was really, really bright. You've just got to know this person. And I'm really pleased Simon introduced us because it's been an absolute joy working with her since. The second thing I remember is in Norwich, there was an eminent hip surgeon known as Keith Tucker. Keith Tucker is known in orthopedic circles as having the highest standards for his patients. And if I'm totally honest, he used to scare the heebie-jeebies out of most of us in the clinical team, but he was excellent. To have high regard from Keith Tucker really was a real nod of acknowledgement, and Mr. Tucker always had high regard for you. And so I always knew Caroline was going to be a mover and a shaker, and there's no doubt that she absolutely has been. So they were the two introductory moments that I'll always remember. From a personal perspective, Caroline and I first worked with each other in 2007, and over that time we published 75 peer-reviewed papers from topics as broad and as obvious as trauma and patellofemoral disorders to whether we should have pink or white paper for case report forms in trials, whether that in fact impacts on response rates, to two of my personal favourites. So I'm sure you all know these publications. In 2011, in International Orthopaedics, we published the paper titled Garbage In or Garbage Out, the importance of dealing with methodological reasoning in orthopaedic meta-analyses. And my all-time favourite in European Journal of Geriatric Medicine in 2012, Out with a Bang, a systematic review of dangers of crematoriums. So it's in each one though, Caroline provides criticality, leadership, academic judgment, and a fresh view to improve every single project that I've ever worked with her on. But she's also incredibly motivating and fun to work with. The other thing that shines out is her collegial nature as well. And if we look at all these papers and all the projects I've been involved with Caroline, is she's trying to bring up the next generation of clinical academics and academics in general. And that open and honest approach to actually bringing and supporting people, I think I share, and I think we both share from Simon actually, is really is hand in hand. And it links back to something that was mentioned earlier about Caroline's unending work around diversity. And I've got absolutely no doubt that Caroline's opened more doors to a more diverse orthopaedic and academic population and personnel involved than were ever open to Caroline and people before her. So I think it was something we should always be incredibly grateful for her work now and in the future, I've got no doubt. So thank you for that. The other aspects of notable experience that I've had the pleasure of working with Caroline is as an editor. So Caroline is editor-in-chief of the Knee Journal, which is the journal of knee pathologies and management. And I think what we can say over the years is Caroline has both improved the quality and the quantity and the robustness of that journal, but also actually opened it to not only orthopedic surgeons, orthopedic trainees, but also AHPs and physiotherapists and the like, which personally I'm very, very grateful for, and has made a big difference to the orthopedic community. So finally, to say Caroline is both a friend and a colleague, and I'm absolutely chuffed to be here to celebrate today with her. I can't think of anyone more deserving of this recognition than Caroline. Yeah, you really, really do deserve this, so really well done. My final important task is to thank Caroline for her presentation. Thank you all for attending today and the organisers today, but also to try to encourage and wish you to join us for a few drinks after today and after the session today. So that will be on level 2 in the Hunter Wing in the Student Union Bar. So if you can join us, that will be absolutely fantastic. Thank you very, very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, so there will be people to help show you the way, so thank you very much.